We need to decide as a country, what is the need we want to solve? What is the problem we're solving with an investor program? This is an opportunity to flip that narrative and that immigrants aren't the problem, immigrants can be the solution to the problem. And an investor program can definitely be part of that if the funds are targeted to an area where the Canadian people can see the benefit. And I think that right now, I keep coming back to housing. For me, housing is that low-hanging fruit.
I argue that more important than housing is providing risk capital to the Canadian innovation ecosystem.
With the background of Mr. Carney, I think we have really a window to restart the Federal Investor Program. If we check our economy actually on the budget side, they need money. They need money quickly.
We're talking about a lot of money and we're talking about a lot of potential for abuse. And so we need to make sure there's a framework in place that things are remaining compliant and then the integrity of the program is going to be maintained.
The province of Ontario set on $1.5 billion and they did nothing with the money. And that's the main reason they decide no economic impact. It sure was on the save on the province. That's the reality. I'm not joking.
We have to recognize that, what competencies the department has and what competencies the department doesn't have. That's not a criticism at all of IRCC. They're not in the business of auditing private companies. They're not in the business of auditing private funds. They're not in the business of financial analysis and business investment analysis. And so I think when we design a program, we need to keep that in mind, that the administration of the program that's going to follow has to follow within the competency of the department.
You can never, ever have perfect policy. Perfection is just an illusion. So what you can have is agility.
What is very funny, a lot of Canadians are advisors of different countries in the world to start their new IIP program. They call us, we help them. Myself, I do a report for one European country. We have other guys that Patrick and I, they are involved doing, they recommend. So Canada, Quebec, they never call us. That's something that we really don't understand.
And I think the most important thing that is missing is this trust between government and the governed. And we want to build that bridge. Hello and welcome to another Catalyst Canada Roundtable. Today, I'm very pleased to be joined by two leading experts in the residency and citizenship by investment industry, Patrick McCarthy and Marc Audet. Marc is the president and CEO of AURAY Capital, a subsidiary of Grant Thornton, and an authorized financial intermediary for the Quebec's Immigrant Investor Program. Marc has dedicated the last 20 years of his career into the field of business immigration, earning an international reputation as a leader in the field and is considered a reference point for investment immigration program and policy. Patrick is the Immigrant Investor Program Director at Sherbrooke Street Capital, also an authorized financial intermediary for Quebec's Immigrant Investor Program, and concurrently the Director of Business Immigration at ClientReferrals, a B2B service provider in the RCBI space. Patrick began his career 27 years ago with CIC, what we know today as IRCC, working in the Business Immigration Unit, where he audited privately managed immigrant investor funds. Today, he's widely regarded as a senior figure in the field and frequently speaks at RCBI events around the world. As always, a full introduction would take much more time than we have, so we encourage you to visit our website to learn more about our distinguished guests. In keeping with our roundtable tradition, allow me to open with a proposition. Canada must rethink its economic immigration framework, and that must start with a reimagination of its business immigration programs. We need to attract and retain entrepreneurs and investors, not just as a matter of immigration policy refinement, but as a strategic imperative for long-term economic prosperity. Drawing on the insights from our previous roundtables, we propose a new federal passive investment program. A preliminary structure might look like this. Investment eligibility should be set at a figure between 1 to 1.5 million Canadian dollars. The investment shall be at risk, locked in for 5 years, and the investment must be allocated by policy-directed caps. For example, 50% should go to Canadian venture capitals or private equity firms, and the other 50% should go to publicly listed Canadian companies. We'll start alphabetically. So, Marc, what do you think about this proposed passive investment program?
You know what, from the experience that we have on the past year, we have to be, I will say, careful. The main reason of that is, we have to go with also with the government in place, the way that they think and what they want to achieve. Actually, we have, I will say, a different prime minister than before. With the background of Mr. Carney, I think we have really a window to restart the federal investor program. If you check the 10 top priorities of Mr. Carney, what he want to achieve, I think the a new Canadian Immigrant Investor Program will be really appropriate for him. And on the other side, if we check our economy, actually on the budget side, they need money. They need money quickly. And for me, my thinking to restart the program, I think we should go with two phases. Phase one is something very simple. Okay, we already have an infrastructure, and I will come back to that. And we can have something more sophisticated, I will say, maybe in the next 2 year landscape. So the phase one can be something similar to what we have, whatever in Quebec or the past federal investor program. I don't want to rock the boat, and I'll have something simple only to restart the wheel and make sure that we can attract, foreign investment to Canada. After that, about the requirements, again, it's all the industry, all the stakeholder, we can have a discussion around coffee, beer during 1 day, 2 day, 3 days about different requirements. We have all our experience around the world, but at the end of the day, the government will decide. Okay. And so I think we should go on the other side. I think what you're doing is very important now because, you catch the information from everybody across Canada, all the different stakeholders. But I would like to know, and usually, for the past forever, and what you want to achieve today is the same thing. You want to prepare something to provide information to do, maybe to the new, the minister Diab is immigration minister to say we should do this, we should do that, whatever is the category. But on the economic cycle, the investor class, you know what? Immigration is not the first place that I will knock at the door. We should go, your paper have to go to Mr. Champagne, who is the finance minister, and Mélanie Joly, who is the Canadian Economic Development Minister. Those two guys together, they will sit with Mr. Diam and say, listen, we need 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 for our government. Just make it happen. Okay. If we go again to immigration department, and Patrick can have some information on that. All the civil servants are not so pleased with any business immigration program forever. Okay, whatever is entrepreneur, passive, active, and so. So when we present something, and after that they make a look of the document, we should do this and do that requirements. That's one. It was always difficult, to put in place a program that can be competitive. But if we go on the other side, on the finance, economic development, and say, listen, guys, that's a priority for Canada. Just make it happen. Okay. So that's the way that I want to maybe to set at the table and we can discuss that all the infrastructure that we have already to have something quick in place. For me, quick is 6 months. In 6 months, we can be back on track. And phase two, we can do something more sophisticated with risk, with whatever is the impact and so. But for the moment, I said we don't have to really reinvent the wheel right now because of Mr. Carney's position now. That's right.
Okay, Patrick. So thank you very much, Marc. So Marc is, from what I understand, he's in agreement with the need for this program, and he contributed on how we can actually push for it. What do you think about the details of this proposition? First of all, do you also agree that we definitely need this reimagining of our business immigration framework? And if so, let's also talk about how.
Yeah, I'm going to echo a lot of what Marc said. I mean, first of all, thank you very much for obviously for having us on to discuss this, and I really want to thank CELA and Catalyst Canada for the work you're doing to push this agenda forward because. Like Marc said, it's time. Canada needs an investor program. We've been absent from this as a on a federal level for over 10 years, and it's time that we get back in this and that we're not left behind. We need a good mix of immigrants in this country. There's no question. We need and investors can be an important part of that mix. For me, the idea you presented, it could very well be a great idea. The devil is always in the details, as they say, right? For me, I think when I'm looking at the redesign of the investor program or what we need to move forward, for me, I really look at three elements. The first element is capacity, and when I mention capacity, I'm not referring to our capacity as a country to welcome or to admit investors, because I think we all recognize that an investor program is going to be, the numbers we admit are going to be a fairly small percentage as a total of the as a percentage of the total amount we're admitting every year. When I'm referring to capacity, what I'm actually talking about is IRCC's capacity to administer the program, to manage the program. And we have to recognize that, what competencies the department has and what competencies the department doesn't have. And that's not a criticism at all of IRCC. They're not in the business of auditing private companies. They're not in the business of auditing private funds. They're not in the business of financial analysis and business investment analysis. And so I think when we design a program, we need to keep that in mind, that the administration of the program that's going to follow has to follow within the competency of the department. So when you say venture capital and you say private equity, for me, the first things that come to my mind are, well, who's going to be deciding what projects would be eligible and which aren't? How is that decision going to be made? Who's going to follow up after that a project has been approved to make sure that they're remaining compliant with the regulations, that they're investing funds according to their investment prospectus? When I think of venture capital and private equity, I also think of big fees, right? Big fees charged by VCs and private equity firms. And so who's going to monitor that? Who's going to monitor to make sure immigrant investor money is ending up where we want it as a country? I think we can learn a lot from the startup visa program, actually. The government handed that program over to an unregulated business association, and they handed it over compliance. A lot of the compliance and even the peer reviews and the program integrity, and it didn't work out very well. And so here we are 5-6 years later, and they kind of had to take it back themselves. And they're caught in a situation where they have immigration officers that don't necessarily have the expertise to review business plans and review, financial projections. And it's putting a strain on the department, a strain at a time when they don't need more strains, on themselves. If we go back 25 years, for the first 10 years of the Immigrant Investor Program, we had private fund managers out there raising capital, but they were unregulated. And so some of these fund managers, they did extremely well. They ran their projects, they invested as they were supposed to. Others, they just couldn't execute the same way. And then there were cases of fraud as well, just complete abuse of the program. And so finally, that resulted in the end of the 1990s, when the government said enough's enough, and they handed it to regulated entities, and they got federally regulated financial institutions involved with the program. And that's when, IROC dealers, what's now CIRO, the Canadian Investment Regulatory Organization, that's when the dealers got involved. So I think one of the takeaways when we're developing a program is we really need to think about that aspect of it, the compliance side that's going to follow, because we're talking about a lot of money and we're talking about a lot of potential for abuse. And so we need to make sure there's a framework in place that we can make sure that things are remaining compliant and that the integrity of the program is going to be maintained. The second element I'd mention is we need to consider the international market and what's out there. In the 1980s, we were 80s and 90s and all the way to 2010s, we were the only game in town. And that's not the case anymore. I say we dominated the investment immigration space like we dominated international hockey. But that's not the case anymore, unfortunately. So, since then, we have an explosion of programs in Europe, Portugal, Greece. Italy has a program. We have the Caribbean. We have the South Pacific. I just read recently New Zealand launched a program a few months ago, and it's taken off very quickly. I think 250 investors in the span of about 2 months. So we need to consider what the other options out there and what we're competing against when we design ours. What's the cost of the program, and also what are the requirements that we're asking of applicants. And this is an extremely important balance. if somebody asks me, what's my opinion? What can we charge? What would clients be willing to invest? It's also a balance of what are we asking from them? Are there going to be language requirements of the program? Is there going to be a net worth requirement, a business experience requirement? Do they have to have education or age? Residency requirement, that's something that already puts Canada, on its back foot compared to a lot of the golden visa programs. We have a residency requirement. And I'm not saying we need to get rid of the residency requirement for investors, but I'm saying that's one of the things we need to consider when we're developing sort of the terms of what we're going to be asking for, these investment terms. So, one thing we could look back at is what we learned from the Immigrant Investor Venture Capital Program. The government they fell victim to the famous Kevin Costner line, "If you build it, they will come," right? They thought we're going to launch this program and people are just going to naturally apply. And that wasn't the case at all, right? Was it because the funds weren't guaranteed? I don't think that was the main reason it didn't succeed. There's plenty of programs that don't guarantee funds. Was it because of the investment level? Not necessarily. 2 million wasn't a crazy amount. Language requirement, the term of the investment, I don't think it was any one thing. It was probably just the ensemble that made the program really uncompetitive. And so what's very important is that we have to strike that balance of what's out there in the international market and what are the requirements we're asking investors, and then that's going to dictate how much we can ask them to invest. And I guess the third point is just to echo, I think what Marc was saying is we really need to focus on the need. And this is the third point I'm mentioning, but it's probably the most important, is we need to decide as a country, and the department needs to decide, the government needs to decide, as Marc said, it's in their hands. What is the need we want to solve? What is the problem we're solving with an investor program? I saw recently, I think you posted something recently about, it was shocking actually, how behind we are in terms of the US in terms of innovation. I disproportionately the amount that Canada invests in innovation compared to the US. So is that the major problem we need to solve in Canada? Is the problem with that the lack of funding, that VCs don't have enough money and private equity doesn't have enough money to invest? Or is it that we don't have the ecosystem in Canada to foster that innovation? Because if that's the case, an investor program is not going to solve the problem, right? The investor program, just having more capital towards innovation isn't going to make us, develop more innovative companies. It's probably going to end up making us throw more money at projects that shouldn't get money. So I think what's really important is that we establish what is the one need, or what are the needs that the government wants to accomplish by introducing an investor program. How can the investor program be part of the solution? It's not going to be the solution, but how can it be part of the solution? And for me, I think the low-hanging fruit here is housing. This is on everybody's mind, and it's a generational issue that we need to solve. We are behind. We haven't built enough homes for the last 30 years. And if we don't get on this and on this quickly, this is going to be a problem that unfortunately is going to grow exponentially. And so maybe affordable housing is a better route for a better place for the funds. But there are a lot of good ideas. Housing could be healthcare. I don't know, but the government really needs to sit down and establish what are the needs and what are the main areas where this money can make a difference. And I think that that's a key. That's going to be a key driver to implementing and designing and then implementing a new investment.
That was fantastic. Honestly, the way you just laid out everything, I think that will set the rest of the roundtable. We need to talk about administration. We need to talk about marketability, and we need to talk about objectives. So let's go back to Marc. Let's assume, and then let's get to administration and lots. For now, let's assume perfect administration. Whatever we put on paper, it's going to be administered perfectly. Okay, so let's just assume we don't have a problem on that front. Let's talk about objectives. Let's talk about objectives because, as Patrick said, our economy is 10 times smaller than the American economy, but the size of our investments in venture capital is 47 times less than the US. And with everything that is happening right now, our top entrepreneurs and our top money makers, it's sad, but it's a fact that they're leaving the country. So we have this deficit. If you look at all the statistics, today we have 50% less entrepreneurs than we did 20 years ago. And, small and medium-sized businesses, SMEs, are the backbone of the economy. So as far as the need is concerned, it's pretty much, I argue that we can use money everywhere. Wherever you go, we can use well-managed money that can help us, boost us out of this crisis that we're in. So, Marc, what are your thoughts on that objective side of things? Like, where should this money go if it ever were to come to Canada? Where would you take it?
But again, I could just come back what I said previously. I think if we go with phase 1 and phase 2, okay, if we want something quick for the government, all this have to be simple. First, as you know, RCC have to put targets, on a yearly basis. So we already have a pilot project pre-approved on the government. So for the business class, it's 2,750, if I'm not wrong, per year that we can hit. So that's already approved by the government on a 5 years period. So that's mean if we have 2,700 application a year, let's say we do that 1 or 2 years, that's more or less close to 8, 9, 10,000 people, because we have to multiply by 3.5 with the dependent and all this. So it's something already in place. We don't have to put pressure on the system that's already pre-approved in the immigration system. First thing. Second thing, as Patrick mentioned, we have to learn also from the past. Okay. And what happened in the past, as he said, in the 90s, I was there also. Mainly on the West Coast, they have some fraud, some scandal. And that's the reason in 1999, they decided to change the program and no more tier system also at the same time, because we have a tier system with different amount per province and all this. And the government decided, in 1999 to put a $400,000 program, across the country, including Quebec. Okay. And at that time, Canada also was if I don't know, Patrick, you remember, you don't have this notion of necessarily of facilitator or broker when they start, because everybody want to come to Canada. So at that time, Canada has maybe 9 business immigration center around the world, like London, Hong Kong, whatever the place. And they said they will promote the program. Everybody want to come to Canada and all this. And after, I will say 18 months, they receive about 300 applications. At the same time, Quebec, with the broker structure, commission structure, we have 3,000 applications. So that's the reason in 2001, they changed they introduced the notion of facilitator. A facilitator used to be a member of the Canadian Deposit Insurance Corporation. So it mainly is bank and trust. And Quebec was broker. And they decided also to put a commission structure plan to give some money. So we have to keep that in mind also. Canada is a nice destination for investor, but you need also salesperson. That's something you have to keep in mind on the other side. And after that, we have to learn also the reason they shut down the program, because that's what happened. Okay. And what is the main reason they shut down the program? Non-officially in 2012 and officially in 2014. I will say 3 reasons. And mainly all of them from the government, not from the private sector, from the industry. First one, I think, was a bad transition between the $400,000 program and the $800,000 program in 2010. Because they make announcement that they will jump the investment amount 2 years before. So serious. Today you go to the shoe store and say the shoes today is $20, tomorrow it would be $40. So what you do? You go today and you buy. So it was the same thing. So we have a rush of investor. So it created a large inventory, over capacity. Not because, we make strong sales force and all this, just because of a bad communication. After that, when they decide to put the program in place, the $800,000 program, they say, oh, we have an inventory of $400,000 case, and now we want to attract a new one.
And your processing time will be 7, 8, 9 years. All this doesn't make sense. So what they decide? Because at that time, they have a quota, not a quota, but a target. 3,000 applications will be processed on the IIP at that time. And they say, we will process 2 old cases for 1 new case. So they will process 400 for 1. So that's mean if you have a target of 1,000 cases in a year, so that's mean the first 1,000 application will be processed in 1 year. That was it. So what do you think happened? Everybody signed up on the Federal Investor Program, and they receive about 700 applications in 2 or 3 months, and 0 in Quebec. And they say, oh no, our program is too popular, too much. We have to shut down. We will receive 5,000 applications. You really don't understand what's going on. So, and the latest one is what they did with the money under the Federal Investor Program. You know, the running gag, all the facilitator meeting that we have with IRCC and the provinces was Ontario. The province of Ontario set on $1.5 billion, and they did nothing with the money. And that's the main reason they decide no economic impact. It sure was on the province. That's the reality. I'm not joking.
No, that is. No. That 100% is the reality. And what else that they did? There were a couple of papers that they came out, and they looked at the passive investment program, and they measured it based on income data, employment income data. Because this is something important, and in all of our roundtables, we did talk about this. If you're bringing a passive investment, you got to understand, you got to manage your expectation, right? I'm not, as a passive investor, I'm not bringing you here to start a business and become an entrepreneur and start showing me income, let alone employment income. Because, you know, if you're a skilled worker, I want you to come here and go to the market and be employed. So there were a lot of issues, lot of issues with how we define success, how we measured success. We want to put all of that behind us. I'm not saying let's not learn from it. I'm saying let us not be hindered by our past failures. So right now, capacity is a good point, Marc. Right, if I'm looking at the level plans, right, for 2026 and for 2027, the target of business immigration is only 1,000 applications. If we want to go with that, I mean, like, whole Catalyst Canada is pointless, right? So our first argument is we definitely need to change the caps. And when we say business immigration under current levels, they're talking about federal startup visa program, and they're talking about federal self-employed program. So both of these programs, they have enormous queues right now. There's so much in the inventory that I don't know how they want to manage it. They did something about the startup visa program. So cap is something that we definitely need to increase. So that's a good conversation to have right now. If we want to increase the cap, to how much? And then this transitions again into the marketability idea. How big is the market that we're targeting? How many? Let's start with this question. Because there's, again, on what Patrick said, let's think that this is a product that we're designing. We have to understand how many buyers can we have for this product, so we have to define the product first. So before we go to how many people we can target, let's talk a little bit about how many are we talking. In our past roundtable, I posed this question. I started our previous roundtable saying, hey, if we get 30,000 investor, that's a big number. Right now, I'm looking at the statistics. Like, there's a good CAGR of the RBI CBI market. It's a market increasing by at least 18% a year. So we have more high net worth individuals in the world. The market is increasing. A lot of countries are coming, but 30,000 we realized in our last roundtable was too much. Professor Surak recommended something around 2,500 to 3,000. Patrick, do you think that's a fair number of passive investors that we can target? And if so, at what level?
You know, I think, what Marc said earlier, we right now we have in the regulations, the minister has the ability to launch a pilot program. And I think Marc said 2,700 a year, 2,750 a year that they can do through a pilot program. And so I think if this government wants to put a program in place, that's probably the number we should work around as the upper end of what we're talking about. Otherwise, what we're talking about is something that's going to have to go gazetted, that's going to have to go through the regulations, et cetera, et cetera. It might take a lot longer to get implemented, to have IRCC implement. What's the market potential out there? I think I'm going to go back to what I said earlier, which is It's this balance. What are the requirements going to be? The minute you put, the market is huge for these programs. Tens of thousands a year apply to different residency and citizenship by investment programs, RCBI programs around the world. Tens of thousands of people apply a year. So it really depends on what we're going to be asking for. What are the requirements we're going to be asking from these investors in order to apply? The minute we put a language requirement in there, already we're cutting it by a big percentage, right? If we further put net worth requirements or management experience or education, we're gonna cut it more. And so we have to balance that. We have to figure out what it is that we want to accomplish. How important, for example, if we're bringing in an investor, is it that they have previous management experience? What if somebody inherited the money? What if somebody inherited the money? Shouldn't that be good enough? How important is it they have a bachelor's degree or a master's degree? We have to really look at what we're going to ask, what we want them to show in order to be an investor.
So let's talk about that. Let's talk about requirements. Like as we said, passive investment, we're looking at their investment and we want them to be passive. We don't want them to go manage their investment like an entrepreneur would do.
Right.
So why do we care about managerial experience?
Yeah.
Do we all agree? Like managerial experience is something that it's not beneficial for a passive investor. Let's not forget, we're not saying, Mr. Entrepreneur, come here, start a business with no entrepreneurial experience. So managerial experience, entrepreneurial experience, we don't think they're reasonable for a passive investor program. What about education? Can we say the same? Do we want you to have a PhD to be able to invest in our market?
On my side, I don't see any add value. Let's say, for example, myself as a former banker and I decide to immigrate to a country. I want to open a flower shop. I don't have any experience of that, but that's my decision. At the end of the day, they are not there to see if they will make a bunch of money or not. So for us, all the industry, I think management experience, the reason they put that many years ago is that was a way to reduce the intake, of investor class. Patrick and I, we make a different recommendation to the Quebec government with the new program. They never listen to us. That's the problem with this program. That doesn't fly at all because each requirement look nice, but all together it doesn't make sense at all. So that's the reason last year they received less than 5 applications. It would be similar more or less this year. It's not the program when you have 5 applications. So it's same thing as
Exactly.
mentioned with the venture capital. They received 5 applications at that time, So what is important for me, if I can have Mr. Champagne office or Milady Johnny office, and we have a discussion, I say, okay, how much money you would like to receive per year? Okay. What kind of term? Do you want something that's stable for 5 years, 7 years, 10 years? Okay. Are you willing to do this to pay back, to keep a portion of the money as in Quebec, maybe, and give back some money? You want to guarantee, do you have a bond attached to that? Yes or no? On the immigration side, because they will have to speak to their colleagues on the immigration. Okay. What is the impact if we don't have the language requirement? Okay. The impact on the economy is this. We should have maybe something like education. No, not so big deal for those kind of investor because most of those guys will have 45 years old and up. The only challenge can be the age for our medical system, that maybe we can arrange something, whatever it can be through the amount or whatever it is. We can have maybe different threshold to balance something. Okay. But at the end of the day, what we need to do is to have the right people from the government around the table. I need to know the 4 corners of the sandbox, and I will help them to design the program. That's it. No, it's
Yeah.
always
What we're doing kind of like bottom up, right? We're saying, hey, government, you were like, you were asleep for so long. And we're honestly like, what are we? Civil society, businesses, associations, the citizenship that we're having this argument on what we want as Canada. So again, let's assume that we're actually decision makers, right? Like what it is that I want from an investor to come to Canada other than money is I want to do everything that I can to make Canada grow on them, right? So when Canada grows on them, they tend to say, okay, what if I transition my main source of income from China to Canada? What if I transition that main source of income, but we have to do it with a good context. So there's got to be a balance between how much of a tough requirement I have for you in the name of retention and the marketability point that Patrick made. On paper, based on the objective for a passive investment program, we don't think education makes sense. We don't think managerial experience makes sense. But what about language? Because language is one of those things that tend to come up in our roundtables a lot. We know that when you're a permanent resident in Canada and you're going for citizenship, at the citizenship stage, based on your age, there will be a language requirement there. But do we need another language requirement for a passive investment program? And if we do, what should that level be? Is it CLB 5? Is it CLB 4? Because a lot of provinces are doing active entrepreneurial program at a level of CLB 4. So what do you guys think about
Again,
the language requirement?
so again, depending on the structure of the program, if you structure something with a work permit or you go directly to the PR, that's a different thing.
That's a
Actually,
good point. Let's talk about that then. What do
okay.
you think? Do you
So
think it
if
should?
well, like if the previous program in Quebec, yes, you have a language requirement, English, French, and so and so. And after you have your CSQ, you go right away to the PR. But actually, with the new program, we have a work permit, and the work permit is already delivered because you have a high level of French. It was too high, and that's the reason that the program doesn't fly. But we can do something in between because we have to put, you have the demand on one side and you have the offer. As you mentioned, we have a lot of investors that the market is there. But again, we say in finance, the market is always right. So we have to fit, with the market. And the market is, on the other side, the less requirement you have, more financial sacrifice you can ask from the investor. I just give you an example.
100%.
So if you say,
100%.
okay, if you say no, let's go on the other side. No requirement, processing time 6 months, you're here. Maybe you can ask 5 million, I will say. Okay.
Our current position on the passive investment program is that it has to be PR first. Our position on the active entrepreneurial program is sure, let's have the work permit because they have things to prove. An investor, the only thing an investor has to prove is here my investment is deployed based on the commitment of the investment is at. I think that is good enough for the sake of the program. Do you agree? It should be PR first. And the only condition that really we're measuring for is the deployment of the investment.
Yeah, I would definitely agree with that. I think that having the work permit would be an unnecessary step. There's nothing that we're asking, unlike an entrepreneur program, there's nothing we're asking them to do when they come here.
Exactly.
In fact, I think we have to recognize a lot of these investors, are not going to spend 365 days a year in Canada, 300 days a year in Canada. They have businesses back home. They employ thousands of people, hundreds of people. They have commitments. They're going to be doing a lot of travel. And so I think that, we're definitely in favor of a program that leads definitely to permanent residence. But when we're talking about language, language it's one of these things is, do we want everyone to have language abilities when they come? I guess, of course, in an ideal situation, that would be perfect. The international market, the EB5 doesn't have in the US doesn't have a language requirement. The European programs don't have language requirements. And so we have to think about that as well. And as Marc said, it's going to, if we're putting in language requirements, then our price point is probably going to have to change a little bit on what we can ask them to invest. As you said, Sia, very, very wisely, is that even if they become permanent residents without language requirements, they're never going to become citizens if they can't pass the language test, right? So, I think that there are ways. I think that most will learn a basic level of language, English or French, when they do come. But whether we need to require it at the beginning, I'm not sure.
There are two arguments. Well, I wouldn't say the PR angle. I'm not saying is an important one because, like, if you want to just give it to what the public feels like, it doesn't sound well. Oh, they're paying their way into Canada and they don't even know how to speak the language. Let's put that aside. The only reasonable argument for language is that it tends to be a very good indicator of how you integrate into the society, knowing the language, right? So kind of like putting that requirement first and having that as a tool to make sure that you're facilitating the integration, I think it makes sense, but the level is really important. So if our position is somewhere between CLB4 and CLB5, but if the startup visa program, like let's think about it, the startup visa program, you are an entrepreneur, you're a startup entrepreneur, you're supposed to have a pitch deck in your hand, go to VCs, to angels, to investors with a CLB5. So if the SUV standard is CLB5, we'd argue for a passive investment, it definitely should be lower, right? Because the passive investors coming here with a lot of means and resources are not.
And also, when you think of the nominee programs, the provincial and the territorial nominee programs, a lot of them, you said it right. It's CLB4 was the those are entrepreneur programs. Those are people that are going to come, boots in the ground, start businesses. But often to qualify, they didn't need to prove that CLB4 until after they came to Canada, right? We would approve them even with CLB0 to come to Canada and start a business. And so I think you're right, Sia, is that if how can that bar be higher for an investor that we're not expecting anything of compared to an entrepreneur? Yeah,
wouldn't make sense. Now let's talk about net worth. The definition that is going out globally for high net worth individuals having a net worth of $1 million USD, that's like 1.4 Canadian. What are your thoughts, Marc, on the net worth requirement and the investment requirement?
I will say for the past, all the formula doesn't make sense. I'll just give you an example. Actually, with the Quebec Investor Program, the requirement is $2 million Canadian dollar personal net worth. The investment is $1.2 million. So anybody, in the world, usually, any kind of investor, you will have 10, 15% cash on the all equity. Okay. So 1.2 out of 2 is 60%. All this doesn't make sense. Okay. And on the other side, if we check only with the Quebec Investor Program with the financing option, all the donation that you have to give to the government, it's like more or less a $600,000 program that you just put your money, it's gone. For an investor to have the capacity to drop $600,000, he cannot make it if I have a $2 million personal net worth. Also doesn't make sense. You have to be $4 million and up minimum, I will say, because it's too much money. All this doesn't make sense. So for me, personal net worth, I don't see the add value on that. Okay, I think again we have to consider like the EB5. EB5, you can have an investor at 18 years old, 20 years old, just receive a donation from his father because the kid doesn't want to go to school, doesn't want to do this, he just want to be in the US. So I will be an EB5 investor. That's okay. So I don't see the investment requirement will drive the personal net worth on the other side. What will be important, the only thing will be the source of funds. That will be our job.
Source of funds for sure. Yeah, due diligence. We're not arguing. Let's open the doors for money launderers and traffickers for sure. Let's assume the most basic. Okay, let's assume the most basic of this. Due diligence, you earned your money with lawful means. Okay, so that's definitely there. That's like the floor. So you're saying net worth is not necessarily a reasonable argument. We can take care of the net worth by the investment amount. Patrick, what do you think about that? Do you think there's an interplay between net worth and the investment requirement?
Yeah, I mean, I think like what Marc said about, most investors, to ask them to put in $1 million, $1.5 million, $2 million, whatever the number ends up being, they're not scrounging all their pennies together to do it, right? They're not putting all their eggs into one basket. I think the relevance of the net worth requirement probably speaks a lot to the source of funds. And I know you said we all agree about the source of funds, and of course we do. And I think that's why there is a net worth requirement, is that the two kind of go hand in hand. Is you need them to prove a certain level, and of course that they've earned that amount legitimately and legally. I don't really have any strong opinions about the net worth requirement. I think that because for the most part it's a non-issue. This clientele, they're very wealthy people, and I think that if we put it at 2 million, if we put it at 3 million, there's a big market for these clients. So what we don't want to do is we don't want to make it overly restrictive. That was one with the venture capital fund. That was definitely a big issue. The net worth requirement. Marc's better with details than me, but if I remember,
It was 10 million.
but it was
It was 10.
50 million if you
If you had 50, they waived the requirement for education and managerial experience.
that
So
seems
that program
seems
no,
random to
let's
me.
just
That seems random to me, right? And so I think we just have to make sure whatever that number is that it's not overly restrictive. That's
okay. So net worth.
And so what we do with that amount also, because for example, you know, the previous federal investor program and the Quebec Immigrant Investor Program more or less was the same. Okay, let's say 2 million. But let's say the guy have 5 million in Quebec, will have to point out each single dollar up to $5 million. On the previous federal investor program, you don't have to do that. You know, it was only, okay, you tell me that you have 5, but you just make sure the 800,000 investment is clear. Okay. On Quebec was, I declare 5, prove me the 5. So that's the pain in the ass a little bit for us, you know, to do all this. So that's when we have to be careful with the personal net worth requirement, what we do with that.
It's just like a safety net. Because I think the personal net worth requirement will have a lot to do if how we decide on what we do with the investment. If we say the investment, a guaranteed investment, is not doing anybody any favor, the money sits there, nobody does anything, and then they come with that venture capital fund and they say, "Oh, BDC, come manage this." Nobody trusts them or whatever. So we're saying if it's at risk. So we got to assume the worst. What if that investment is lost? So we want the potential investor to have a safety net that they can, continue. So that's how I see the interplay between what type of product are we offering. So let's talk about this. Do you guys agree that the new program should be at risk investment?
that's a $1 million question.
I think a program have to be, the reason we are successful in Quebec and Canada in the past year. If you compare with whatever is the startup visa, provincial nominee program, the program have to be predictable. You know, I think we have to make sure that day number one, when we say to the client, you have whatever the $1 million, you have the blue eyes, you have no medical problem, you have security check, you are in. It's just the only question of time that you will get it. That's it. So if we make condition and the things at risk, look the EB5 program on the other side. Actually, on the EB5, immigration is at risk and the investment is at risk.
100%. Yeah.
So,
a lot of countries do it at risk. Portugal is at risk.
so
Real
on the
estate
other,
you buy is at risk.
no, but again, it's a question as a country, as Canada, as a citizen of Canada, do we really need that, for as intake of money to take the money of some people? And again, it's a question of structure to put everything in place. Whatever is fund manager, is developers for housing, infrastructure, whatever it is, this will take times to put all this in place. My point is we have a window today in the next 6 months. We have a budget's coming. We have another one next spring, and we have to move quickly. And that's the reason my recommendation is go, guys. Don't reinvent the wheel. Go with something simple to start, only to open the door. And during that time, we can have all the roundtable they want to present and have a more sophisticated product in 2 years, really. So for me, at risk, I will be careful on that. To have a portion that we don't refund is a question. At the end of the day, is like at risk. You're losing whatever 100,000, 200, 300 or 400,000, whatever is the amount. So it can be the same calculation. But to have a structured program like whatever any other country, I think would take so much time, and all the civil servant on the immigration will be involved with that and all this, and this will never fly. So we need again something that we can raise fund quickly to help our government to show them that we can bring such kind of a quality investor, and after that we can, just improve all the structure. That's I will say from today with the actual government in place, I will say.
I think.
What do you think?
Yeah, I think your question is good. I mean, but I think the underlying question, when you say should we have a guaranteed program or a not guaranteed program, the underlying assumption or the underlying question is, well, with a not guaranteed program, there's going to be more economic development. I think that's the underlying assumption of that.
100%.
And I would argue that that's not the case. I would argue that that's a fallacy in the out there, is that what tends to happen with a lot of these programs that you reference Portugal, you reference the EB5, is that in order to get marketability, developers, promoters, whoever, they find ways to reduce that risk as much as possible, and find ways, to the point that it's not achieving what your basic underlying premise is. And so, again, I don't want to come out one way or the other an opinion on whether the funds have to be guaranteed or not. I think the first question that has to be answered is, where are the funds going? Who's going to manage the funds?
Perfect.
What is what are we targeting, and what problem are we solving? And if we can't figure that out, then the other things will come into play.
No, I think that's a very good transition, because you're absolutely right. If the assumption is, okay, I put it at risk, and this money at risk will go to VCs, and VCs actually spend it on deep tech, and then Canada, all of a sudden, we become the center of entrepreneurship, it makes sense. But what if not? So let's talk about administration a little bit. If we take the at-risk part, and then now we want to take this money and then we want to put it somewhere, and we want to also care for the passive investor, right? We don't want to put their money somewhere that is not managed well and is going to be gone. So investment allocation and oversight. Like, so far, we're pondering two models. One model would be, okay, let's have a dedicated fund model. Pool all the investment, pool it at one place, and then create an entity, probably government, let that government manage it. But then again, we said, look at the past. That was the same kind of a model that they wanted for the venture capital fund. They said, BDC, come manage this fund. We get all the funds, we get all these 2 million to you, and then you go manage it. And then you go to the market, and BDC is not famous for managing, money the way that private market does. The other model is, okay, let's have designated investment organizations. Like, let's learn from the SUV. I'm the government. I don't know how portfolios work. I don't know how funds work. Let's use private parties, okay? So in the designated investment organization model, we say, okay, are you a fund manager? Are you a security dealer? Do you have licenses from CROC, IROC, all of these things? Come get your designation, and then you are the private party partner. The passive investor can come, they go to Patrick, they talk to Patrick about their portfolios. It's just, I, as the government, for example, I would just say, hey, 50% of the portfolio should go to these type of companies, 50% to these type of companies. And then you, Patrick, Mark, and anybody else in the market manage their portfolios based on government regulations. What do you think about these two models?
Yeah, I mean, the government model, of having that money come into a centralized, fund, centralized entity, I think is probably going to be the most effective in terms of getting the money to where the government wants. If the government is coming out and saying, okay, what we want to do is housing. Okay, we're going to, in September, we're going to know the details of Canada Builds, right? And Prime Minister Carney's new plans for that. And so if we're going to be building houses and affordable homes in this country, and having a centralized structure like that, being able to raise money on the capital markets, being able to raise money, on the capital markets, but as well through what we're talking about, through investor immigration, could very well be, a great solution. Comparing it to what happened with the venture capital, I don't think is the right comparison, because BDC didn't fail in their mandate. They didn't fail in their mandate of investing the money. The program just failed at being marketed, at it getting off the ground, right? So it's kind of an apples and oranges situation there. Again, if we're going to go the other route where I think we have to learn from the past, is that, we need this has to be then a very regulated space. This has to be a space where you can't have unregulated entities, out there managing and investing investor capital, right? It has to be done in a regulated space.
Two things on that.
Mark, what do you think?
Two things on that. I think we have to separate, like, the facilitator and the broker. I think they have a need for them, for the in-between from overseas to Canada. The money that the Canadian government will receive, whatever the place is, have to come through a Canadian financial institution. Okay? So we will just comply with FinTrack and all this, and they will be pleased with that the money is clean. Okay? So that's part number one. Part number two, I will see a couple of things. That we have a corporation called Invest in Canada. Okay, this corporation, okay, their mandate is to attract foreign company to Canada. On a year, they don't do hundreds of companies, I can tell you. But when they sign a couple of them, we're talking a couple of $1 million each. That's foreign direct investment. And what we're doing is foreign direct investment. But instead to attract large corporation, we will attract a high net worth individual, and we can multiply by thousands of them. So we can have a similar structure than to have, as Patrick mentioned, we can have like a housing and infrastructure corporation. Okay. And all the money will go there. Okay. With that structure of money, they have to choose depending what they want to do. If they have to pay back in 5, 7, 10 years, you're sure they will have to manage the funds. And all these, if we go like with a Quebec structure with a zero coupon bond, with all the interest that they can use, so they can use that maybe to reduce the GST on new housing for contractor, developer, to push, the economy, and that's it. And the main reason, that at the end of the day, Ontario set on a $1.5 billion because that program was mainly managed by immigration department, not finance, not economic development. But I can tell you, if you put Mr. Champagne in the loop and you want to see a result, well, you will see the money will be used properly and monthly.
So you are also in favor of a dedicated fund model. So we create one fund, we pull everything there, but just we make sure that they manage that fund well, and then they get to decide where they want to take it. If they want to take it, if they want to use it as risk capital to innovation, they can. If they want to inject it into housing, they can. If they want to inject it to publicly traded companies, they can. So we're in favor in this roundtable of a dedicated fund model as opposed to give designation like a startup visa model. Kind of like, come apply for your designation. Are you a securities dealer? Are you under your regulation already in your province of a securities commission? Then okay, come play this game. So no, you're saying, both of you are saying dedicated fund model is the way to go.
Just bring you back, guys, to the top 10 priorities of Mr. Carney this year. Number one, find new sources of capital. Number one.
Yeah.
Okay. Number two, one Canada economy. Okay. That's a fun. And 4 and 5, nation building projects. That's it. That's the reason I told you guys that we have the best window ever to move quickly. So again, I think we should know exactly what Mr. Carney and Champagne and Jolie want to achieve. And after that, we can share our experience and say, guys, if you go there, that will be the impact. If you go there, that will be the impact. That's your decision. You invite us for dinner, and please, I can, so, so that's it. So I think if I come back to my first intervention, I think your paper have to go first to finance and economic development minister.
Oh, well, for sure. Advocacy.
And you will see that we can they will pay attention to that. I'm pretty sure.
I hope so, because like we're creating a win-win situation, right? We're not saying, one of the things that in some roundtables came up is like, we're making this argument because, we're immigration lawyers, so we have to make money. You're intermediaries, you're going to make money. But we're saying, okay, we're doing this out in the open because we believe that we can create a win-win-win scenario for everybody, right? It's just all these negative perceptions recently about immigration in general, but historically about business immigration. I mean, like there's this underlying undertone of anti-entrepreneurial behavior, anti-money behavior when it comes to immigration, right? I mean, like there's something in the public that doesn't see the value of business immigration. And I think with having these conversations out in the open, we can change that. If somebody is willing to bring their life worth to Canada and put it somewhere that can benefit us, why not? Patrick, what are your thoughts?
Well, you mentioned earlier, you talked about the PR angle, the public relations angle, it's actually a super important component to the development of a program, because we need the Canadian public on board with this, because for the last I don't know how long, maybe 18 months, 2 years, this narrative that immigrants are the problem, immigrants are the cause of the housing's going up and everything. we need to flip this narrative. This is an opportunity to flip that narrative, and that immigrants aren't the problem. Immigrants can be the solution to the problem, right? And an investor program can definitely be part of that if the funds are targeted to an area where the Canadian people can see the benefit. And I think that right now, I keep coming back to housing. For me, housing is that low hanging fruit. It's because that's on the minds of Canadians right now. And Marc talked about nation building, and I think that's an imperative right now.
No, that's well. Let's not forget Canada. We're a $2 trillion GDP country. Even if we get $20 billion out of an investment program, that's like a drop in the bucket. So we're not like, let's compare Canada to somewhere like St. Kitts, right? St. Kitts is getting 50% of their GDP from CBI market. So it's a very, very big part of their game. For us at national level, like this is like a drop in the bucket. But as we are arguing, if you really want to see the impact, you got to target it. Like housing is one area. I argue that more important than housing is providing risk capital to the Canadian innovation ecosystem. And I want to go back to the beginning, right? We know that we have a solid ecosystem. On that, we have confidence. The only thing that we are hearing from the innovation ecosystem is like, guys, there's no risk capital. Like the Canadian attitude, the Canadian investment attitude is very risk averse. They don't want to do it. Like, look at, if you want to go to the housing crisis, we also have to remember something else. We are the only G7 country with more money in residential real estate investment than business investment. That tells a lot about us as a country and how we want to invest our money. So we don't want to like argue right now whether it should go to innovation or whether it should go to housing, but we agree it should be somewhere specific and it should be done transparently so people can see. If I welcome 2,000 investors, whatever, they brought me $20 billion here, you can see where the $20 billion went and you can see that impact, right? It wasn't just interest money that we didn't know where exactly it went. Did that interest money just, ended up being a salary of a few government employees? It's not bad, sure, pay some salaries with that money, but we can show that impact better. And by that impact, I think we're taking care of the PR aspect. Because at the end of the day, people just want to see this. We don't want to see poor students coming here on a promise that was lied to them, work three jobs in the gig economy, and then they end up frustrated. And we have headlines, man. They're committing suicide and they go back to their parents in body bags. Yeah. Right? Nobody tends to talk about that. What's the worst thing that can happen to an investor? Oh, I came here. I don't like the weather. I spend some money. I pack up my bags and I leave. That's the worst case scenario. But we tend to forget what's the worst case scenario for a lot of other class of economic immigrants. So I think that's also another important part of this conversation that we're trying to raise awareness of. Not all immigrants are equal, So
maybe, at the end of the day, maybe the government will be the first user of the funds because if you remember one of the other reasons they shut down with the program, whatever was in Quebec, because it was like the interest rate was so low at that time. Now interest rate, for 5 years bond is over than 4%. So it's not, see, if you have something at $0%, and on the other side, don't forget the international competition. I think Canada will have to issue bond and they will have a competition with other countries. They will have to increase the price to get investors. So if we attach that with immigration, that's a way to attract people and selling your bond at a cheaper price than the other country. So you have to check the economy, what's going on. And if I was Carney or Champagne, maybe I will, the first one to pick up to use to slow down my deficit before I do investments on other things. So that's the reason it can be very, very attractive for them.
It's an excellent point, actually. If we look at the Quebec Investor Program historically, there was a 4, 5, 6 year period there where borrowing from the Immigrant Investor Program, that means, the capital that immigrant investors were putting in, which is at 0%, that borrowing accounted for around 4 to 5%. I think one year it topped out at 6.5% of the total borrowing of the province, right? that has a huge impact, right, on the public finances in the province. It has an impact on, the cost of servicing debt, but also the cost when we go out and we finance other debt, right? Because it affects the credit worthiness. And so that's an excellent point that Marc is raising, is that, yes, when you compare it to the total size of the economy, Sia, that, this is just a drop in the bucket, but this can have a much bigger impact on the public finances as a whole.
Because when you check the investment in Canada, the Canadian direct investment in Canada is higher than the foreign direct investment. And usually I think a country will try to have a higher level on foreign direct investment for its economy. For the past 10 years, Canada have a big challenge on that. So that's the reason they create
100%.
That's the reason they create Invest in Canada. So now you have the investor program guy and say, just move, And after that, we will do the
Marc, there is something we have to confront. Here's the thing, if you have access, and by access, I mean, if you were a British citizen, that you could go anywhere and invest your money, Canada wouldn't be your first pick, right? Like, we have to confront that fact. We're not famous for how investors make money. We're not famous for how entrepreneurs make giant businesses. As a matter of fact, we said that before you joined and we were off camera with Patrick. I'm saying, God, look at where we are right now with everything that is happening. It's prudent to divest from Canada and go to the US. This is like business prudency. I mean, like, look at everything if you want to protect yourself. So you got to use the leverage for immigration. There are a lot of peoples. And let's not forget, in the RCBI market, the top source countries are China, Russia, and Middle East. Right? These are the people that are saying, hey, we don't have the privilege of having a passport that gives us this mobility, that gives us this standard of life. So we're willing to bring our life's worth to somewhere that gives us that access. And that's the leverage we're talking about here. We're not saying, we're not coming up with financial products. We're coming up with immigration products that, as I said, it's a win-win-win. Because Canada on its own, I'm afraid to say right now, we're not an attractive destination, neither for investment nor for entrepreneurship.
So then, Sia, what you need to look at in that equation is then, okay, if we're going to say that, if we're going to go to that 4-risk model, and you're going to invest in the innovation space into whatever it is, some kind of central entity or privately run entities that are deploying money into the innovation space at risk, and your money's, there's no guarantees that everything, then that investor is saying, well, what about the US as an option? What about New Zealand as an option? What are my options there? And yes, the US also, their program is at risk, but most of the successful EB5 investor programs are real estate deals, right? They're backed. They're at risk, but there's a backing there.
And Patrick, let's not forget their criticism of the EB5 program, right? Like, there are a lot of criticism on EB5 program. Like, most of the money is going to luxury home building, and then there is not so much transparency, but I think we can mitigate that risk. It depends on how the government, for example, if I want to say, okay, venture capital is high risk money, don't take the money to venture capital, do TSXV, right? Like, let's say, okay, you're bringing me $1 million. At the $1 million, 50% of that, I put it into TSX, I put it in TSXV, like venture capital, I have the whole point is, let's show the public where this money is going, and let also remember, because in our report, we're also recommending paradigm shifts. Like, you can never, ever have perfect policy, right? Perfection is just an illusion. So what you can have is agility. Okay, I start this program, I test it, I include people in policy making, right? Lawyers, intermediaries, fund managers, academics come, and like, this is actually one of the things that we're thinking of proposing. We need a business immigration council, people that can come to the table, learn from what we're implementing, and then be agile to, come back, refine, improve. I think that's the only thing that we can do. Other than that, we can't just come up with a program and sit outside and say, oh, this is going to do well for 10 years. No, the same thing happened to the Startup Visa program. Perfect intentions, very, very marketable program. And look at where it is right now. So that agility, I think, is another thing that we want to talk about, The ministers, everybody should be a part of this conversation, and they should welcome our insight as experts on the matter. That's another base argument that we're putting forward.
Yeah. Everybody's voice in this subject is extremely important, and I like I said at the onset, this discussion, I'm glad we're having this, because because now is the time that Canada needs to be looking at business immigration, investor immigration, as part of the solution of the problems we're facing here. Whether it be the lack of funding for innovation or housing or healthcare or whatever, investor immigration can be part of that. Can be part of that discussion.
And what is
Well,
right and
gentlemen,
what is
thank you very much. Marc, do you feel that there's anything that we didn't talk about and
what
you
I
wish to
said
discuss?
in conclusion, what is very funny, a lot of Canadians are advisor of different country in the world to start their new IIP program, to revamp the program. They call us, we help them. Myself, I do a report for one European country. We have other guys that Patrick and I, they are involved doing, they recommend. And Canada, Quebec, they never call us. That's something that we really don't understand.
That I think that is the root of the problem, because that has been our argument from day one. We have the wisdom, we have the genius, we have everything we need in this country, and I think the most important thing that is missing is this trust between government and the governed. And we want to build that bridge. We want to build that bridge, and we want to emphasize, regardless of what we give you, nothing is ever going to be perfect, but what can give us the best shot is this collaboration. I hope we can do that together. Patrick, is there anything that you think that we must discuss but we didn't get the chance to discuss?
I think Sia, you did a great job of walking us through it.
Thank you very much.
I think Marc and I could spend hours probably sitting around and talking policy and back and forth.
For sure.
I really want to. I applaud Sila again and Catalyst Canada for really spearheading this, because I think there's a lot of, like Marc said, there's a lot of intelligent voices in this country, and there's a lot of experience in this resources the government can use as as a tool as they're developing a program. I think the key, is we need a program. I believe we should, as a country, we need to get a program out there quickly. I'm saying not at the expense of program integrity, not at the expense of compliance. I'm very optimistic that Prime Minister Carney and his new government are gonna see that as well. And so I really thank Catalyst Canada for pushing that envelope.
Well, perfect. Thank you both, gentlemen, very, very much for giving us your time and attention. That's it for this roundtable.
Thank you.